March the 10th, 2024, we flew across Norway. Great glaciers have carved deep-sided fjords right up the eastern coast of Norway. Over the years, the mountains have been worn down, forming thousands of small rocky islands. People live in every valley and plateau, warmed by the Gulf Stream. We were heading for Bergen, one of the most beautiful cities in Norway. Bergen has been a port for trade and communication for 1,000 years. For 400 years, it was a major centre for the Hanseatic League, the German-based consortium which traded throughout Europe and beyond. The old warehouses and offices that lined the port have been restored. Narrow streets in Bergen still hold centuries of history. After 2 days in Bergen, we boarded a ship to take us up the coast of Norway, from Bergen to Kirkenes and back. 12 days, visiting many tiny townships, and alighting at 8 of them. The ship we travelled on up the coast of Norway was the Polarlys, Polar Light. The ship was built in 1996, but completely refurbished and upgraded in 2016 and again in 2023. It has a capacity for about 600 people. It was close to full on our trip with about 530 people, I think. The ship has a top speed of about 28 kilometres per hour. As it serves the communities up and down the Norwegian coast, it can also take about 20 cars and a lot of supplies. It has a small hospital room for sick people and a small prison for prisoners that it transports. It needs a crew of at least 45 people to run the ship, and I think we had a crew of about 60. We had a pleasant cabin on the 5th deck, 2 below the top, with a large, comfortable double bed. The cabin was large enough for a small desk and chair and wardrobes. We had our own shower and toilet. A screen gave us access to the ship's cameras and to maps. We could also make ourselves a cup of tea or coffee in our room. And we had a large window to look out. On the 4th deck, below our cabin, was the main dining room. Breakfast and lunch were buffets, and there was a large variety of food. We could go to those meals whenever we were ready. For the evening meal, we had a set time of 7 p.m. and a set seat with some other Australians. Each night we had a menu with 3 options: meat, fish or vegetarian. The ship prided itself on using local produce, and the meals were exquisitely prepared. One special night, close to the end of the trip, we had a 5-course meal with soup as well as an entree, and finishing with cheeses. Up the front of the 4th deck was a service area and shop selling some warm clothes and a few souvenirs. In front of that area were 2 rooms well equipped with audio-visual equipment. Here we had gatherings every day to tell us about what would be happening in the following day and what to look out for as we travelled. There were sessions on the whales and the birds, the geology, and on the characteristics of the Norwegian people. These were not academic presentations, but were informative and were offered in both English and German. Below the fourth deck was another 2 decks of cabins, and below that the car and luggage departments. The ship stopped at 60 ports on the 11-day journey, and many of those stops were just 10 or 15 minutes. The ship would pull up beside the wharf, it would lower the main door to the luggage area, and on the wharf would be a little forklift truck ready to come into the ship to take off the tray of luggage for that community and to load on whatever was needed to be transported. Within a few minutes, the ship would be ready to sail again. About once a day, the ship would stop for 2 to 3.5 hours. This would give us all a chance to disembark. In most of those locations there were optional organised tours. But given the expense, we did 4 of those tours, and on other occasions walked around by ourselves. When we woke on our first day in our trip up the coast of Norway, we were nearing the city of Alesund. In the background, the mountains were covered with snow. The ship docked right by the city centre. A coach took us through the town and out about 10 kilometres to Giske Church. It was built around 1150 from white marble. The outside of the building has been covered with chalk, but in a couple of places the marble is visible. The church holds about 125 people. It was originally a chapel for the Giske family, the local lords, but it is a reminder of how long people have been living in this area. Connected via bridges and tunnels is the Alnes Fyr, Alnes Lighthouse. This lighthouse was established in 1852 and the current lighthouse built in 1876. It was automated in 1982 but still guides boats into the harbour. From the lighthouse, we went to a lookout over the city of Alesund, where some coffee and cake had been prepared for us. The views from this lookout were spectacular, although rain blurred the view somewhat. Alesund has a population of about 50,000 people. It's the centre for cod fishing and also has some light engineering. Later that day, walking around the streets, the defining feature of Alesund was evident. In 1902, almost the whole city burnt to the ground. A new city was built in the following years, all in Art Nouveau style, and all in stone that could never be burnt to the ground again. Today it's a popular place for tourists and for shopping. Waking to our second day in our trip up the coast of Norway, we were travelling through the wide Trondheim fjord. It is Norway's 3rd longest fjord at 130 kilometres. And along the sides of the fjord were small farms. One suspects that these farmers also took the opportunity to supplement their income with fishing. Nidaros Cathedral, the great Gothic cathedral of Trondheim, was built between 1070 and 1300. It was built over the burial site of King Olaf II, who lived between 995 and 1030, who was responsible for the Christianization of Norway and is the country's patron saint. He is celebrated with a statue on a giant obelisk in the main city square. The cathedral quickly became the most important site of pilgrimage in Scandinavia. Like the city, the cathedral has been affected by fire. It was badly damaged in 1531 and then in 1708. Major rebuilding began in 1869 and continued through to 2001. It's interesting to see the runic graffiti on the stones of the cathedral. It has been used through the years for the coronation of Norwegian kings, and more recently the consecration of members of the royal family, and indeed some of their weddings, though Trondheim was the capital only from 997 to 1217. Here is a stone screen with a statue of Christ the Teacher. Our last stop was a lookout over Trondheim. The city has a population of more than 200,000 people and is the third largest population centre in Norway, following Oslo and Bergen. About 1/3 of the employment is in the education and health sector. Another major sector is professional, scientific and technical services. It's also a major government centre for this part of Norway. On our second visit, we were better able to get a view of many wooden offices and warehouses along the banks of the river Nidelva that winds its way through the city. There have been warehouses here since the 13th century, although the earliest of these date from the 18th century, rebuilt after the Great Fire. Today, many of them are cafes and art galleries. A little way out of Trondheim, we pass the Kjungskaya lighthouse. It was built of stone in 1880. We crossed the Arctic Circle early on our third day. Hestman Island sits almost on the Arctic Circle and towers 568 metres above sea level. The legend is that a knight was turned to stone because he forgot sunrise, due to his love for a woman. At the base of the rock is a small fishing village. On the mainland side of the ship, the mountains rise to 1,600 metres. We have an early lunch that day as we dock at our next port of call, Bodo. We've organised to go on a guided coastal walk. Despite being by the sea, the path in the coastal walk is icy, and we're given crampons to fit on our boots to avoid slipping. The views from the coast are stunning. We note how every available area is well used by the Norwegian people for farming. In the midst of the silver birch trees, the guide stops again to point out an ancient Viking grave. She then proceeded to tell us about the origins of the Vikings in Doggerland, an area now in the midst of the North Sea, once a very marshy area with great resources, a large early human settlement. We again admire the coastal scenery before returning to the ship on a coach. We can see a little more of the town of Bodo as we reboard the ship. Bodo is a major entrance to the north of Norway, a city of 50,000 people, the terminus for the trains and a major centre for communications. During World War II, 2/3 of the city's buildings were destroyed by German bombing. Thus much of the city dates from after the war. Capital of the North, Tromso. Tromso, a city of almost 70,000 people, is linked to the mainland by a great bridge, 1 kilometre long, now augmented by a tunnel across the strait. On the mainland side of Tromso Bridge is the distinctive Arctic cathedral. It's not truly a cathedral, but is a major Lutheran church completed in 1965 in concrete and steel. It has a beautiful organ and unique acoustics. Walking along the wharf, we noted that most of the buildings were constructed in the style of the old trading offices. However, these buildings now include restaurants and souvenir shops. Many of the boats moored here were for the tourist trade. We walked as far as the Polar Museum, which tells the history of the various Norwegian expeditions to the Arctic region by explorers, hunters, and researchers. As we returned to the ship, we noticed the statue of one of the greatest explorers, Roald Amundsen, who was the first person to reach both the South and North Poles. Amundsen started several of his major expeditions from Tromso. On day 5 of our trip, we were sailing between the islands and the mainland to the most northerly part of Norway and of Europe. The seas in this area are full of fish, and there's evidence that people have lived in this area for 10,000 years. Late in the morning, we stopped at Honningsvåg, a town of 2,500 people. It is close to the North Cape, the northernmost part of the continent of Europe. Quite a number of people from this ship went on a bus the 34 kilometres to that point. But for $800 for the two of us, just to say we'd been to that point, we were not convinced it was worth the money. We could at least say we'd seen Europe's northernmost roundabout, up the top of this road. Approaching the Kjøle field, there were fascinating cliffs and rock formations. There's both the cathedral and the chapel here. Kirkenes was the turning point on our trip on the coast of Norway. Many people were just travelling north and left the ship here to go to the airport to take a plane south. Others went off to see the Russian border, just 15 kilometres away, or have a ride on a dog sled. We soon came to a statue of a Russian soldier. Kirkenes has long had cordial relations with its Russian neighbour, with centuries of trade across the border, and it was freed from the Nazis by the Russians at the end of World War II, after the Nazis destroyed the town. The monument says, "To the brave Soviet soldiers who liberated Kirkenes, 1944. A little way down the street was a World War II bunker. One can go into the bunker and hear something of the story. Further down the street is the large and distinctive church of Kirkenes, built after the destruction of World War II. In the city square is the statue of a woman with children. The inscription says that it is a war memorial. It's a reminder that in war it is so often the innocent women and children who suffer most. They certainly suffered here when the Nazis burnt down their homes. Also in the city square is a children's playground in the form of a king crab. They are a speciality for the local fishermen. Note also the woman with a shopping trolley on skis. They have long and cold winters here. On the 7th day of our trip, our major stop was at Hammerfest, known as the world's most northerly town, north of most of Siberia, Canada and Alaska. One of the staff on the ship was leading those who wanted to go to see the meridian globe. The snow virtually covered the meridian globe, which celebrates the project which involved the collaboration of Russia, Germany and Norwegian scientists from 1816 to determine the size and shape of the Earth as a planet. Nearby was a place which hired out enclosed buggies. You do not need a full license to drive these, so teenagers use them a lot. They do well in the snow. Across the river was a new and rather distinctively designed hospital, and snowplows were busy clearing the road. The snow lay thickly on the houses, the trees, the cars. But the traffic continued to flow. However, after days of snow and snow clouds, the clouds began to clear, and that night there was suddenly an announcement over the ship. The northern lights had been spotted. We all headed for the deck to see whatever we could see. It was hard to photograph as one could not see the controls of the camera, and we were all huddled together. However, the green lights kept playing over our heads. My phone actually made the best of catching something of their extent and of their colour. We disembarked at Harstad for a tour, a taste of Vesterålen. Harstad is located on the large island of Hinnøya. The town has a population of 21,000 people and has grown rapidly in recent years. We travelled through the town by bus to a cultural centre which lies north of the town. Here is Trondheim's church. It's the third church built on this site, with the first being built in the 11th century. This church was completed around 1435, but that makes it the oldest stone medieval church in Norway, and in fact the northernmost surviving medieval building. We were invited into the church for a very short service led by the Lutheran minister, acknowledging that this is and has long been a centre for worship. The pulpit was consecrated in 1752 and is decorated with the 4 evangelists and contains an hourglass to time the sermons. Above the altar are 3 pictures which may have been given to the church by the Hanseatic League, suggesting that this area was important for trade. The oldest part dates from around 1460. On the left is Mary's mother, Anne. Among those on the right is Mary's grandmother, Susanna. The walls of the church are 2 meters thick. The font dates back to medieval times. We were then invited to walk 100 metres to a cultural centre. This centre was only completed a few years ago and takes one through the history of Norway in this region. Bronze objects 3,000 years old have been found in this area, indicating there was a significant community here at that time. This triptych, which originally stood in the church, dates from around 1500. It was created in Germany and given to the people here. It is indicative that Harstad had already become an important trading centre. The major export was dried stockfish. This had become a very important commodity throughout Europe because of the Catholic decree that on Fridays and during Lent, only fish and no meat could be eaten. Next to the cultural centre is a wooden church which was reconstructed in the form of the first church on this site. From here we went into a reconstructed farmhouse to hear more about how people lived. Here they lived together in a single room, playing, talking, eating, sleeping and weaving.
These are the fibers you want to use. You don't want to core of the plant anymore. So in this moment it feels almost like my own hair and quite nice for linen clothing. But it's also quite strong. So you can make fishing equipment of it. Hello. Oh hey. The mathematics. If I work 37.5 hours a week and my goal is to produce a dress this size and pattern, modern working hours, 37.5 hours a week, I need 3 months to complete. But I only need 3 days, I think, to sew my dress together. That's a quick part.
Our bus took us inland, through some rich agricultural areas to the Sorfolda fjord, where the Vika River carries water from the snow-capped mountains into the Sorfolda fjord. The river is directly fed by an icy lake.
Flowing from the lake into the fjord when it's low tide and is pushed back into the lake when it's high tide. So let's have a look if it's high tide or low tide as we get further down.
Revsnes, where the bus drove onto a ferry to cross the fjord to Flesnes. It was a journey of about 6 kilometres and took 20 minutes or so. Just time for a drink and a waffle with brown cheese.
And a bit further north here, between this island and the next island, we had a very, very shallow area. At low tide, it is said that you could ride a horse from one island to the next, and the horse rider would not get wet feet. which tells us that the water was maybe a meter deep at its lowest. And then as the tide comes in, it might have a depth of 2 meters, 2 meters and 50 centimeters. So only very small boats could pass this area. But then they digged out a trench between these two islands, and this trench is now 7 meters deep, which means big ships like your Polarlys can pass in between these islands today. But nevertheless, it is still Ålen there. Ålen is now just 7 meters deep instead of maybe 2 meters.
We sailed through Rafsundet, a relatively narrow 20-kilometre strait, with the region of Västerålen on our left and the region of Lofoten on our right, known for its more rugged terrain. The ship circled at the mouth of Trollfjord. It's 2 kilometres long and just 100 metres wide, with cliffs rising 1,000 metres on either side. It was here in 1880 that the Battle of Trollfjord took place between steam-driven boats who were netting all the fish and boats with sails and oars. Early on our 9th day, we sailed out of the Arctic Circle. The snow line had receded as we neared Sandjasnyon, with its elegant Helgeland bridge crossing the fjord. The town is not large, but is a bustling place. Just down the coast are the Seven Sisters, a series of peaks, each about 1,000 metres high. The Norwegian legend is that there were 7 sisters who were dancing naked in the field when observed by Varg and Callan, who lived in the Lofoten Islands. He chased the girls. Hesmanen was woken by the commotion and shot an arrow, which landed in the sea. But as they forgot the sunrise, they were all turned to stone. Whatever the story, the mountains make this one of the most beautiful parts of the coastline. In the afternoon, we docked at the small town of Brønnøysund. We walked along the wharf to the sign which indicates that we are halfway down the coast of Norway. Some large chairs on the wharf allow one to take that in. South of Brønnøysund is Hurtigruten, the island mountain with a hole in the middle, according to legend a result of the arrow shot by Hesmanen. It's hard to get perspective, but the hole is 30 metres high and 15 metres wide, large enough for a fishing boat to go through. The following day we woke early to explore Trondheim a little more, this time on foot. By 9:30 in the morning we were on our way again. In the afternoon we arrived at Kristiansund, a town of 24,000 people who are spread over 3 islands. There is evidence of settlement here 10,000 years ago. Back in the 17th century it was known for its timber, but that trade was replaced with dried and salted cod, which was traditionally dried on bare rock faces. As we departed, the rain set in. The following day, with rain continuing, we could only get glimpses of the scenery we were passing. As we neared Bergen, we could see increasing numbers of homes along the shore. Early in the afternoon we docked, and our trip through good and bad weather had come to an end.